The ring touched my skin before I understood what was happening. The ballroom had been loud seconds earlier. Laughter, clinking champagne glasses, the soft hum of a string quartet, playing something expensive and forgettable. But when the cold metal slid onto my finger, everything went silent. That was the moment my humiliation stopped belonging to me. 20 minutes earlier, I had been standing beneath crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than my yearly rent, listening to the man I was supposed to marry explain to 200 guests why I wasn't good enough. Daniel Brooks always loved an audience. He adjusted his cufflinks like he was delivering a keynote speech instead of dismantling our engagement. He said words like unstable, dramatic, ungrateful. He said he'd overlooked certain flaws out of love. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, but no one interrupted him. No one ever interrupts a man with money in Manhattan. I could feel the heat climbing up my neck, but I refused to cry. That would have made it easier for them. Easier to label me emotional. Hysterical. I kept my spine straight in my 4-inch heels and folded my hands in front of me so they wouldn't see them shaking. My mother used to say dignity is the one thing no one can take unless you hand it over. So I didn't hand it over. Even when Daniel's new investor, a woman in a red dress who had been smiling at him all night, placed a hand on his arm like she had already replaced me. Even when someone near the back whispered, "Poor girl," in the tone people use at funerals. I didn't beg. I didn't defend myself. Because the truth didn't need to be shouted across a ballroom. The truth was quieter than that. I saw him before I realized who he was. He had been standing near the bar the entire time. Dark suit tailored within an inch of perfection, broad shoulders relaxed like none of this concerned him. Adrian Moretti. Even if you've never met him, you've heard the name. Real estate. Shipping. Investments that move markets with a phone call. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't frowning either. He was watching. Not Daniel. Me. There's a particular kind of stillness that powerful men carry. It's not loud. It doesn't need to be. When Daniel reached for a champagne flute and lifted it slightly in my direction, like he was toasting the end of us, I saw something change in Adrian's expression. Not anger. Decision. He set his glass down with deliberate calm and walked toward us. Conversations thinned as he passed. People noticed. They always do. He stopped an arm's length away, close enough that I could catch the faint scent of cedar and something darker, something controlled. His eyes were a deep, unreadable gray. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, voice low but carrying effortlessly across the marble floor. Daniel laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "Just cleaning up a mistake." I felt that sentence like a bruise forming under the skin. Adrian's gaze never left mine. "She doesn't look like a mistake." No one spoke. The air felt charged, like before a summer storm. Then he did something no one expected. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a ring. Not delicate, not ornamental, but solid, engraved with a crest I recognized from the financial pages. He stepped closer. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure he could hear it. "May I?" he asked quietly, and somehow that was the only gentle thing anyone had offered me all night. I didn't answer. I didn't move. He took my left hand anyway, his touch steady, not possessive, just certain. The metal was cool as it slid over my knuckle and settled there like it had always belonged. "She stands with me," he said, not raising his voice. He didn't have to. The silence that followed was heavier than any accusation. Daniel's face drained of color. Phones came out. Whispers shifted direction. And for the first time that evening, I wasn't the girl being dismissed under chandelier light. I was the woman wearing Adrian Moretti's ring. No one applauded. That was the first thing I noticed after the shock wore off. The room did not erupt into cheers or outrage. It simply adjusted. Conversations resumed in lower tones. I shifted. The hierarchy had been rearranged in less than 10 seconds. Adrian released my hand, but the warmth of his touch lingered against my skin like an imprint. The ring felt heavier now, not physically, but symbolically, as if it carried the weight of every gaze in the ballroom. Daniel cleared his throat, attempting to reclaim ground he had already lost. "This is ridiculous," he said, forcing a laugh that did not reach his eyes. "You do not even know her." Adrian turned toward him slowly, measured, like a man who never rushed because the world always waited. "I know enough," he replied. There was no threat in his voice. That was what made it powerful. Daniel glanced around for support, But the investors who had been nodding along minutes earlier were suddenly studying the ceiling or their phones. In Manhattan, loyalty follows influence, and influence had just changed hands. I felt my pulse in my fingertips. I should have spoken. I should have clarified that I had not agreed to anything. But the truth was, for the first time that night, I was not standing alone under the lights. Adrian shifted slightly closer, not touching me, just aligning himself at my side. It was subtle, but deliberate. "You embarrassed her publicly," he said to Daniel, still calm. "That was unnecessary." The understatement landed harder than any raised voice. Daniel's jaw tightened. "This is between me and my former fiancé." Former. The word hung in the air. Adrian's expression did not change. It stopped being only that when you decided to make it a spectacle. I could see Daniel calculating, measuring risk the way he did during negotiations. Adrian Moretti was not someone you dismissed. He was someone you researched before speaking. And Daniel had not prepared for this variable. A woman near the front whispered my name, this time not with pity, but with something closer to curiosity. I realized then that the narrative had shifted. I was no longer the discarded bride. I was the woman Adrian Moretti had chosen to stand beside. The thought made my stomach tighten. Chosen. That word felt just as dangerous as rejected. Adrian glanced down at my hand briefly, confirming the ring was secure, then looked back at me. "Walk with me," he said quietly. It was not a command, but it was not a request either. I hesitated for half a second, long enough to feel the weight of 200 eyes. Then I nodded, because staying would mean enduring more whispers, because leaving on my own would look like retreat, and because part of me needed to understand why a man like him had stepped into my disaster without warning. As we moved toward the exit, the crowd parted again. I caught fragments of conversation. "Is it real? Since when are they connected?" Daniel should have known better. The marble floor felt steadier beneath my heels now. Outside the ballroom doors, the noise softened into distant music. The hallway was quieter, lined with framed black and white photographs of old Manhattan skylines. Adrian stopped near a tall window overlooking Fifth Avenue. Yellow taxi cabs moved below like a river of light. He finally faced me fully. Up close, his composure was even more striking. No smirk, no triumph, just focus. "Are you all right?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. All evening, no one had asked how I felt. They had labeled me, analyzed me, dismissed me. But no one had asked. I swallowed. "I am fine." It was automatic. He studied me for a long moment, as if weighing the truth of that statement. "You did not defend yourself," he observed. I did not need to. My voice was steadier now. Anyone who believed him would have believed him regardless of what I said. Something flickered in his eyes. Approval, maybe. "Most people beg when cornered," he said. "You did not. I have too much self-respect for that." The words surprised even me. Adrian nodded once, almost to himself. Good. The single syllable carried quiet satisfaction. I looked down at the ring again, the engraved crest catching the light from the hallway sconces. "This," I said softly, lifting my hand slightly, "is not a small gesture." "No," he agreed. "It is not." The city lights reflected in the glass behind him, framing his silhouette in gold. But neither was what he did. I met his gaze. "You do not know me." "You are right," he said. "I do not." A pause. Controlled. Intentional. But I know character when I see it. The air between us felt different now. Less electric. More deliberate. "And tonight," he added, voice lowering just enough to feel personal, "you kept yours." I did not expect the hallway to feel quieter than the ballroom, but it did. The music behind the closed doors sounded distant now, like it belonged to another version of my life that had already ended. Adrian remained standing across from me, hands relaxed at his sides, posture composed, as if stepping into someone else's engagement party and altering its outcome was an everyday occurrence. I became acutely aware of the ring again, the way it caught the overhead light, the way it changed how I held my hand. "You understand what this looks like?" I said finally. My voice was calm, but my pulse was not. He did not hesitate. "Yes." No apology. No attempt to soften it. Just acknowledgement. I searched his face for arrogance and did not find it. "Then why?" The question carried more weight than the single word suggested. Why risk his reputation? Why tie his name to mine? Why intervene at all? He glanced through the tall window at the flow of traffic 12 stories below, then back at me. "Because some things should not be done publicly without consequence." The answer was simple, but it did not feel shallow. And you decided you were the consequence, I said. The corner of his mouth lifted almost imperceptibly. I decided he needed one. The certainty in his tone unsettled me. Not because it felt reckless, but because it felt deliberate. Daniel had humiliated me in front of people who mattered to him. Adrian had responded in the same currency. Publicly. Strategically. My phone buzzed in my clutch. Once. Twice. I did not need to look to know who it was. Adrian's gaze flicked briefly toward the sound, then returned to my face. He will attempt to fix this, he said. Of course he will. And you? I asked. What exactly have you done? The question lingered between us. I needed to know whether I had just been used as a pawn in a larger game. His expression sharpened slightly, not in anger, but in focus. I do not make gestures I am not prepared to stand behind. The statement settled heavily in my chest. This was a gesture. No, he corrected gently. It was a position. The distinction mattered. I looked down at the ring once more. The engraved crest felt cool against my skin. You do not even know whether I want this position. His eyes softened, just enough to register. If you tell me to remove it, I will. That surprised me. Power, offering an exit. But, he continued evenly, I suspect you do not want to walk back into that room alone. He was right. I hated that he was right. The idea of facing Daniel's revised narrative without visible support made my stomach tighten. Pride had carried me this far. Pride alone might not carry me further. You stepped into something personal, I said. Yes. You could have. Ignored it. Yes. But you did not. He held my gaze steadily. No, the honesty in his answers made it difficult to dismiss him as impulsive. What happens now? I asked. The city lights reflected faintly in his eyes. Now, he said, you decide whether this remains a moment or becomes a statement. My breath caught slightly at that. He was offering choice again. Not ownership. Not pressure. Choice. Inside the ballroom, the music swelled briefly as the doors opened and closed again. Life continued. Deals were being made. Champagne was being refilled. My engagement had dissolved and been replaced in under half an hour. If I walk back in there with you, I said slowly, people will assume things. People always assume things, he replied. The question is whether those assumptions protect you or diminish you. Protect. The word resonated more than I expected. I had spent months trying to make myself smaller to fit Daniel's expectations. Quieter. Easier. More agreeable. Tonight, I had finally refused. Adrian was not asking me to shrink. He was asking me to stand. I lifted my hand, studying the ring one last time. This does not mean I owe you, I said firmly. His response was immediate. You owe me nothing. The simplicity of it steadied me. I straightened my shoulders, the way my mother had taught me before every difficult conversation. Then we walked back in together, I said. Adrian nodded once, a subtle acknowledgement that felt more like respect than victory. As he opened the ballroom doors and the lights spilled over us again, I realized something unexpected. I was no longer the woman who had been left at the altar. I was the woman who had chosen how to return. The ballroom doors opened, and the sound returned like a wave, controlled but undeniable. Conversations dipped for half a second before rising again, softer this time, recalibrated. I felt Adrian's presence at my side, not touching me, not guiding me, just there. The difference was subtle but powerful. I was not being led. I was being accompanied. Heads turned as we stepped fully back into the light. Daniel stood near the center of the room, speaking in tight, measured sentences to two men who suddenly looked less certain than they had earlier. When he saw us, his words faltered. His gaze dropped immediately to my hand, to the ring. It was almost imperceptible, but I saw the exact moment calculation replace confidence. Adrian did not rush forward. He did not seek confrontation. He simply walked with steady composure toward the bar, as if he had every right to be there, as if this evening had unfolded exactly as intended. The crowd adjusted around us once more. A woman who had avoided eye contact earlier now offered a polite nod. One of Daniel's colleagues gave Adrian a respectful greeting, voice noticeably deferential. Influence shifts quietly. It does not need announcements. Emily, Daniel said sharply as we passed within a few feet of him. My name sounded unfamiliar in his mouth now. I paused, not because he commanded it, but because I chose to. Adrian stopped as well, turning just enough to acknowledge Daniel without granting him dominance. This is impulsive, Daniel continued, forcing steadiness into his tone. You are upset. You do not need to escalate this. I studied his face carefully. The same man who had publicly dismantled me now sounded almost conciliatory. It would have been laughable if it had not been so predictable. You escalated it. I replied evenly. My voice surprised me with its clarity. I simply declined to participate. A flicker of irritation crossed his expression. You are making a mistake. The irony almost made me smile. Adrian's voice entered the space calmly. If there are business concerns arising from tonight, Mr. Brooks, I am certain they can be discussed through appropriate channels. It was not a threat. It was a reminder. Daniel understood it immediately. His jaw tightened, but he did not argue further. The investors nearby were listening now, and Daniel knew better than to appear reckless in front of them. This is not over, he said quietly to me. For the first time that evening, his words held no power. It already is, I answered. Adrian's gaze lingered on Daniel for a measured second longer. Then he turned away, effectively ending the exchange. The dismissal was controlled, effortless. We continued toward the bar. A bartender who had earlier avoided meeting my eyes now asked politely what I would like to drink. The shift was undeniable. I was being addressed differently. Not pitted. Not scrutinized. Respected. I requested sparkling water. My hands felt steadier when I accepted the glass. Adrian ordered nothing. He did not need the prop of a drink to anchor him. You handled that well, he said quietly, just for me. I handled it honestly, I replied. He inclined his head slightly. Honesty under pressure is rare. The compliment did not feel excessive. It felt observational. Across the room, Daniel resumed speaking to his associates, but the dynamic had changed. His gestures were sharper now, less fluid. People watched him with new awareness. Reputation is delicate in rooms like this. It can take years to build and seconds to fracture. I glanced down at the ring again, then back up at Adrian. You understand that this will be discussed tomorrow, I said. It will be discussed tonight, he corrected calmly. That is inevitable. And you are comfortable with that? He met my eyes fully. I do not step into situations I am not prepared to defend. The consistency in his answers steadied me. There was no bravado, no hesitation, just resolve. The string quartet shifted into a slower piece. Couples resumed dancing cautiously, as if testing whether the social equilibrium had truly stabilized. I realized something then. The room was not watching me with scandal. It was watching me with interest. I had not been diminished. I had been repositioned. Adrian leaned slightly closer, voice low enough to remain private. We do not have to stay, he said. You have already made your point. I considered that. Staying meant enduring more speculation. Leaving meant controlling the final image of the evening. I straightened my shoulders once more. 5 more minutes, I said. Then we leave. A subtle approval crossed his expression. As you wish. For the first time that night, the choice was entirely mine. 5 minutes in a room like that feels longer than 5 hours anywhere else. I became aware of every glance, every subtle shift in posture when someone recognized the crest on my hand. The string quartet continued playing, but the music sounded different now, like it was underscoring a story that had changed direction. Adrian stood beside me without crowding me, without performing possession. That, more than anything, unsettled and steadied me at the same time. He did not need to display authority. It was assumed. A woman from one of Daniel's investment firms approached carefully, her smile measured. Emily, she said, as if testing how my name fit in this new context. I did not realize you and Mr. Moretti were acquainted. The phrasing was deliberate. Acquainted left room for interpretation. I returned her smile calmly. We were not, I said truthfully. Until tonight. Her eyes flicked briefly to Adrian, who acknowledged her with a polite nod that carried quiet finality. She excused herself moments later, clearly deciding that speculation was safer at a distance. You are adapting quickly, Adrian observed softly. I am surviving, I replied. He studied me for a second. There is a difference. I considered that. Survival implies fear. Adaptation implies control. I preferred the latter. Across the ballroom, Daniel's posture had tightened further. I watched as one of his associates leaned in, speaking into his ear with visible urgency. Daniel glanced toward Adrian again, then away just as quickly. The power dynamic was no longer subtle. It was visible, not explosive, not dramatic, just real. My phone buzzed again in my clutch. I did not need to look to know the headlines were already being drafted in private group chats. I silenced it without checking the screen. Tonight would not be dictated by notifications. Time, I said quietly. Adrian nodded once. We moved toward the exit again, this time without hesitation. As we passed through the center of the room, conversations softened instinctively. No one attempted to stop us. No one questioned the ring. Influence, when properly wielded, discourages interruption. Just before we reached the doors, Daniel stepped into our path. Not aggressively, not recklessly, just enough to force acknowledgement. His voice was lower now, stripped of its earlier performance. Emily, this does not have to be permanent, he said. I looked at him steadily. The chandeliers reflected in his eyes, but the certainty he had worn earlier was gone. You are right, I answered calmly. It does not. His relief surfaced too quickly. Adrian remained silent, but I felt the shift in attention beside me. Because what ended tonight, I continued, was not my engagement. It was my tolerance. Daniel's expression hardened at that, but he did not respond. There were too many witnesses. Too much risk. Adrian finally spoke, voice even. Mr. Brooks, I suggest you focus on preserving what remains of your evening. It was not a command. It was advice. Daniel stepped aside. Not dramatically. Just enough. The path cleared. We exited the ballroom without looking back. The hallway felt cooler this time. Quieter. More definitive. As the elevator door slid open, I caught my reflection. In the mirrored interior. The same dress. The same heels. The same woman. But the posture had changed. Shoulders back. Chin level. The ring glinting under recessed lighting. Adrian stood beside me, hands loosely clasped in front of him. You did not need me to answer him, he said after a moment. No, I agreed. But I appreciated that you did not interrupt. The elevator descended smoothly, floor numbers lighting up one by one. You understand, I said carefully, that this does not bind me to anything beyond what I choose. His response was immediate. I would not have stepped forward if I believed you were incapable of choosing. The doors opened to the lobby, where marble floors gleamed under soft lighting. Outside, Fifth Avenue shimmered with late evening traffic, headlights streaking past like lines of moving gold. A black car waited at the curb, driver standing by. Adrian did not reach for my hand. He did not guide me. He simply opened the door and waited. Where to, he asked. The question was simple. The implication was not. I looked out at the city I had walked through alone for years. Home, I said. This time, it felt like a place I would return to differently. The car door closed with a muted, expensive sound that felt nothing like the slammed doors of arguments I had known before. The city moved outside the tinted window in streaks of light and shadow, taxis weaving through traffic, pedestrians bundled in coats despite the mild Manhattan evening. I sat back against the leather seat, suddenly aware of how exhausted I was. Not physically, emotionally. Adrian gave the driver an address with quiet precision, then turned his attention to me. He did not crowd the space. He did not fill the silence. He let it exist. I appreciated that more than I expected. You live alone? He asked after a moment. The question was neutral, not invasive. Yes. I kept my voice steady. A one-bedroom on the Upper West Side. Nothing dramatic. A faint nod. Dramatic is overrated. I let out a breath that almost felt like a laugh. The tension of the evening had not fully left my shoulders, but it had shifted into something else. Awareness. I looked down at my hand again. The ring caught the passing streetlights, flashing briefly every few seconds. This will not stay quiet, I said. No, he agreed. It will not. There was no attempt to minimize the impact. Tomorrow there will be speculation. Articles. Opinions. Yes. And you are prepared for that. He studied me for a long second. Are you? The question landed differently than I expected. I considered it carefully. My name would be connected to his now. His world was not small. It was built on boardrooms, negotiations, influence, and rumor. I did not ask for tonight, I said honestly, but I am not ashamed of how I handled it. His expression shifted slightly, something almost like approval. Then you are already prepared. The car slowed at a red light. Outside, a couple crossed the street hand in hand, laughing at something private and simple. I wondered briefly what simple felt like. You could have made a statement without the ring, I said quietly. Yes. So why that? His gaze dropped briefly to my hand. Because symbols are understood faster than explanations. The answer was strategic. Efficient. and deeply intentional. And what exactly does this symbol communicate? I asked. He did not hesitate. That you are not unprotected. The word hung between us. Protected. I had never framed my life in those terms. I had framed it in independence, in capability, in endurance. I did not need protection, I said, not defensively, just clearly. No, he agreed. You did not. But he needed to understand that humiliating you would not go unanswered. The difference was subtle but significant. This was not about rescuing me. It was about balance. The car turned onto my street, quieter than Fifth Avenue, lined with brownstones and soft lamplight. My building came into view. Familiar. Grounded. The driver eased to a stop at the curb. Adrian did not immediately open his door. When you wake up tomorrow, he said calmly, you may decide this was impulsive. It was impulsive, I replied. He inclined his head slightly. Perhaps. But it was not careless. The distinction mattered. I reached for the handle, then paused. If I decide this was a mistake, I said carefully, I will remove it. If you decide it was a mistake, he answered evenly, I will respect that. No argument. No persuasion. Just certainty in his own boundaries. I opened the door and stepped onto the sidewalk. The night air felt cooler now, cleaner than the ballroom. Adrian exited as well, walking around the front of the car to stand a respectful distance away. For a moment, we simply looked at each other under the streetlight. The city hummed softly behind us. Thank you, I said finally. The words felt earned. He nodded once. You kept your dignity on your own. I only adjusted the lighting. The line surprised me. It was almost poetic, but understated. I glanced at the ring one more time. This does not make me yours, I said quietly. His gaze held steady. No, he replied. It makes a statement. The rest is up to you. I turned toward the steps of my building, keys already in my hand. As I reached the door, I felt the weight of the evening settle into something steady rather than chaotic. I looked back once. The black car was still at the curb. Adrian stood beside it, composed as ever, watching not with possession, but with intent. For the first time in months, I did not feel diminished. I felt deliberate. I did not sleep. I lay awake in the dark with the city humming faintly beyond my window, headlights sliding across the ceiling in soft, shifting patterns. The ring rested against my cheekbone when I turned onto my side, cool and unfamiliar. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the ballroom again. The chandeliers. Daniel's expression when he realized control had slipped. Adrian's steady gaze when he asked if I was all right. At 3 a.m, my phone lit up again on my nightstand. Messages stacked over one another. Missed calls. Notifications from numbers I had not saved. I did not answer any of them. I let the silence become deliberate. By 6:30, the sky had softened into pale gray. I sat up slowly, the weight of the evening settling into clarity rather than chaos. I walked into the bathroom and turned on the light. The woman in the mirror looked the same, but there was something different in her eyes. Less apology, more certainty. The ring gleamed under the overhead light. I lifted my hand, studying it carefully. It was not delicate. It was not subtle. It was a declaration. I expected doubt to surface. Instead, I felt something steadier. Resolve. The first news alert came at 7:15. A financial blog. A headline framed as speculation rather than fact. By 7:20, 2 more followed. By 7:40, Daniel's name was trending in the business section for reasons that had nothing to do with romance. I did not smile. I did not celebrate. I simply absorbed the reality of influence in motion. When my phone rang again, this time I looked at the screen. Daniel. I let it go to voicemail. A second later, a text appeared. We need to talk. I placed the phone face down on the counter. We had already talked. He had spoken publicly. I had responded publicly. That chapter did not require a private revision. I dressed for work with deliberate calm. Navy blazer. Cream blouse. Low heels. Nothing dramatic. Nothing reactionary. I did not hide the ring. I let it remain visible. When I stepped outside, the air felt crisp against my skin. Manhattan in the morning carries a different rhythm. Coffee cups in hand. Subway grates releasing warm air. The world does not pause for personal upheaval. That steadied me. As I reached the corner, I noticed a black car parked discreetly across the street. Not the same one from last night, but similar. The driver did not approach. He simply remained there. Present. Protective without intrusion. I understood the message immediately. Adrian had not disappeared with the night. He had extended the perimeter without asking for acknowledgement. My phone vibrated again. This time, a different name. Adrian. I hesitated for half a second before answering. Good morning. His voice came through, calm as ever. I assume you have seen the coverage. I have, I replied. And? The question was not demanding. It was measured. It is loud, I said. But it is not inaccurate. A brief pause. Are you comfortable? I considered the word carefully. Comfortable was not the right description. I am aware, I answered instead. There was a subtle approval in his silence. There will be a board meeting this afternoon, he said. Daniel will attempt to contain the damage. Is that your concern? I asked. No, he replied evenly. My concern is whether you regret last night. The honesty of the question surprised me. I looked down at the ring, at the way it caught the morning light. No, I said finally. I do not regret it. Another pause. Softer this time. Good. A single word, but it carried weight. This was never about ownership, Emily, he added quietly. It was about alignment. Alignment. The word lingered long after the call ended. As I continued toward the subway entrance, I realized something I had not allowed myself to consider before. Last night had not only shifted Daniel's narrative. It had shifted mine. I had not been rescued. I had been recognized. And that difference mattered more than I expected. The subway platform smelled like coffee and metal in yesterday's rain. I stood near the edge, not close enough to be careless, just close enough to feel the rush of air as the train approached. My reflection flickered in the dark tunnel glass. The ring caught the fluorescent lights again, unmistakable even in the harsh underground glow. A woman beside me noticed it. Her eyes lingered for half a second, then shifted to my face as if trying to place me. Recognition is strange in a city this large. It travels faster than sound, but pretends to be accidental. When the train arrived, I stepped inside and held the pole with steady fingers. I did not hide my hand. By the time I reached my office building in Midtown, my phone had vibrated so many times it felt like a second pulse against my palm. I silenced it before walking through the revolving doors. The lobby television mounted above the security desk displayed muted financial news. I did not need the captions to know what they were discussing. The security guard, who had greeted me every morning for 3 years with polite indifference, offered a look that was almost respectful today. Morning, Miss Carter, he said with a slight nod. Good morning, I replied evenly. No hesitation. No apology. The elevator ride to the 22nd floor felt longer than usual. When the doors opened, the usual hum of keyboards and quiet conversations faltered. Heads lifted. Screens dimmed. My coworker Hannah approached first, eyes wide but careful. Are you okay? She asked softly. Not curious. Concerned. That mattered. I am fine, I said. And this time, it was true. She glanced at my hand, then back at my face. That was bold. I considered that word. Bold implies risk. It implies intent. It was necessary, I answered calmly. The day moved forward whether I was ready or not. Emails accumulated. Meetings proceeded. No one mentioned Daniel directly, but his name hovered in the air like humidity before a storm. Around noon, my manager asked if I needed to step out early. His tone carried more deference than usual. Influence extends outward. It touches places you do not expect. I will stay, I said. There is work to do. He nodded as if that confirmed something about me. Around 2:30, my phone buzzed again. A message from Daniel. The board has concerns. We need to resolve this. I stared at the screen for a long moment before typing a response. There is nothing to resolve. I set the phone down without waiting for the reply. My pulse remained steady. At 4 o'clock, another message appeared. This time from Adrian. There will be photographers near your building at 5. Do not be surprised. The warning was clinical, not dramatic. I appreciated that. Are they yours? I typed back. A brief pause. Some. The honesty almost made me smile. When I exited the building at 5:15, the air felt charged. 2 cameras lifted immediately. Flash. Flash. Questions overlapped. Miss Carter, is the engagement confirmed? Are you moving in together? Was last night pre-planned? I paused on the top step, aware of every eye. For a second, the old instinct to shrink surfaced. To duck my head and disappear. But that was last night's version of me. I straightened instead. I have nothing to add, I said clearly. What happened last night speaks for itself. No defensiveness. No elaboration. The flashes slowed. Controlled answers give little oxygen to speculation. A black car eased to the curb again, quieter than the noise around it. The door opened from the inside. Adrian stepped out this time instead of waiting. Not hurried. Not possessive. Present. The cameras shifted focus instantly. He did not address them. He did not offer statements. He simply walked up the steps and stopped beside me. Not in front. Not behind. Beside. Are you ready? He asked softly. The question cut through the noise. I glanced at the photographers, at the city that had already begun rewriting my story without permission. Then I looked at him. Yes, I said. And for the first time since the ring touched my skin, the word felt entirely my own. The cameras followed us down the steps, flashes reflecting off the glass doors behind me and the polished hood of the waiting car. Adrian did not touch me, but the space between us felt intentional, defined. When he opened the door, he waited for me to decide first. I slid into the back seat without hesitation. The noise outside dulled the second the door closed. Manhattan became muted motion again, a city that devours scandal by the hour and demands something new by morning. Adrian joined me on the opposite side, leaving deliberate distance between us. The driver pulled into traffic smoothly. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The city lights flickered across his profile, calm and unreadable. You handled that well, he said finally. You did not give them more than they deserved. I exhaled slowly. They were not the ones I was worried about. His gaze shifted toward me, attentive. Daniel. I shook my head once. Myself. The admission surprised even me. It is easy to react when everyone is watching. It is harder to decide who you are when they stop. He studied me in silence, as if weighing that carefully. And who are you? He asked. The question did not feel like interrogation. It felt like an invitation. I looked down at the ring again, at the way it had already become part of my reflection. I am someone who refuses to be diminished, I said. The words felt grounded. Not dramatic. Just true. A subtle approval softened his expression. Good, he replied. Because the narrative will attempt to simplify you. I glanced at him. And you? He held my gaze evenly. I do not simplify what I respect. The statement landed deeper than I expected. Respect. Not possession. Not conquest. Respect. The car turned onto a quieter avenue, the traffic thinning as we moved away from the busiest blocks. There is something you should know, he continued calmly. Daniel's board meeting ended an hour ago. I waited. He will retain his position, Adrian said. But not his leverage. The words were precise, almost surgical. No boasting. No cruelty. Just consequence. I nodded once. I did not ask you to intervene in his career. You did not, he agreed. But public behavior has public costs. The logic was cold, but not unfair. Silence settled again, this time more comfortable. I realized I was no longer bracing for impact. I was assessing possibilities. This cannot remain symbolic forever, I said quietly, lifting my hand slightly between us. No, he agreed. It cannot. Eventually, I will have to decide. Yes. No pressure. No timeline imposed. Just acknowledgement of reality. The city skyline appeared in the distance as we approached a bridge, lights reflecting across the dark water below. If I remove it, I said carefully, it will not be because I am afraid. I would not assume that, he answered. If you keep it, he added after a moment, it should not be because you feel obligated. The balance in his response steadied something in me. This was not a cage disguised as protection. It was a door left open. The car slowed near my building again. The same lamppost cast its warm circle of light across the sidewalk. Before the driver could exit, Adrian spoke quietly. Emily. I met his eyes. Last night was not an accident, he said. It was a choice. I do not make those lightly. There was no demand attached to the statement. Only clarity. I reached for the door handle, then paused. Neither do I replied. The words carried more promise than I had intended. I stepped out onto the sidewalk, the cool evening air brushing against my skin. The ring felt different now. Not heavier. Not lighter. Intentional. Adrian remained by the car, watching without ownership, without expectation. Just presence. As I climbed the steps to my building, I realized something quietly undeniable. He did not put that ring on my hand to claim me. He put it there so the world would think twice before trying to erase me again.